Hi students, today I am going to teach a very important topic, that is Preface to the Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth. You must all have studied about William Wordsworth. Maybe you might not have studied lyrical ballads in detail, but I am very much sure that you must be knowing what is lyrical ballads, when it was written, what was the preface like. So just have a look at it, and we are going to start about the lyrical ballads, the preface to the lyrical ballads, its genesis and history. First of all, Wordsworth's preface to the lyrical ballads. What is it actually? It is a capital document of abiding significance. Abiding significance मतलब होता है abundantly, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, बहुत सिग्निफिकेंट ये टास्क है, ये वर्क है. एंड इट अंडरवेंट अ नंबर ऑफ रिविजन्स. कई बार इसके रिवीजन हुए, जब तक कि जो प्रेजेंट फॉर्म हमारे पास है दैट इज कंसीडर्ड टू बी द फाइनल वर्जन. एंड द लिरिकल बैलेड्स वाज फर्स्ट पब्लिश्ड in 1798. डेट इंपॉर्टेंट है, याद कर लीजिएगा. एंड टू दिस एडिशन Wordsworth merely added a short advertisement or introduction. In this advertisement, the poet modestly pointed out that his poems were in the nature of experiment to find out whether themes taken from humble, from the common life, and composed in the language of real people, that is actually suitable for poetry. What Wordsworth did is to be remembered here. He also attacked the artificial diction of the contemporary poetry. उस समय आपको याद हो अगर, तो न्यू क्लासिकल पीरियड फिनिश हो रहा था, रोमांटिक आ रहा था. तो पिछला जो समय था दैट वाज ऑफ डॉक्टर सैमुअल जॉनसन ब्ला ब्ला, एंड द डिक्शन वाज आर्टिफिशियल. तो वर्ड्सवर्थ ने क्या किया? ही अटैक्ड एट दैट आर्टिफिशियल डिक्शन ऑफ कॉन्टेम्पररी सोसाइटी. एंड सी हियर व्हाट इज रिटन टू द सेकेंड एडिशन ऑफ लिरिकल बैलेड्स published in 1800. he added a more detailed preface. उसमें और डिटेल प्रेफेस उसने डाल दिया. Fine. Now see, the 1800 preface was perfected for the 1802 edition of the lyrical ballads, and 1805 edition you will find no significant changes. Now the important thing here to be considered for detail is that when he began writing it in summer of 1800 and completed it by the end of September, Coleridge ने क्लेम किया, Coleridge claimed in 1802 that it was, quote unquote में लिखा उसने, half a child of my own brain, since many of his ideas had originated in discussions between the two poets. क्योंकि ज्यादातर जो लिखा गया है poets या poems, they have been in discussion with Wordsworth, and he may have been, or he may have ever been further helped by you can say making notes on those topics and then finalizing it and then writing it. Nevertheless, it was Wordsworth who finally shaped this material, and in doing so assimilated it to his own way of thinking, अपने ही तरीके से, अपने ही सोच के द्वारा. And with several of his formulations, Coleridge subsequently came to disagree. बहुत सारे formulations के बाद Coleridge ने कहा कि भाई हम नहीं मानते हैं आपने जो चीजें किया है. Subsequently he disagreed to it. Fine. Now the 1800 preface was revised, was enlarged, was perfected for the 1802 edition of the lyrical ballads, as I told you. And the most significant addition to the 1802 preface is a long account of the nature, the qualifications, the functions of a poet, the demonstrations of his superiority over the man of science, and also an examination of the nature of poetic pleasure. And to this edition, Wordsworth also added an appendix. देखिए लिखा है इस एडिशन में वर्ड्सवर्थ ने एक अपेंडिक्स में जोड़ा ऑन पोएटिक डिक्शन devoted to a consideration of poetic diction and its history. The preface was constantly revised and perfected for each and every subsequent edition of the Lyrical Ballads, but basically the poet's views remained the same. आप एडिशन चाहे जितना बदलते जाएं, जो व्यूज थे वो सेम थे. No significant changes were made for the edition of 1805, but in the edition of 1815, ये देखिए, this preface appeared as an appendix, and the volume was provided with an entirely new preface with an essay supplementary to the preface which was added. Fine. Now, the preface that we study today is that of 1802, और जैसा कि Garrett ने point out किया हुआ है, Garrod, and as Garrett has pointed out, the essay supplementary 1815 forms a worthy companion to it. I am teaching you the minutest details so that you may not be able to miss any question. So, the preface 1802, appendix on poetic diction 1802, and the essay supplementary, they contain all that is worthwhile in Wordsworth's literary criticism. Fine. Now we will come to the aims and objectives, that is the creation of taste. Wordsworth खुद कहता है, और क्या कहता है, that his aim in writing the preface was not to give an elaborate account of his theory of poetry or to make a systematic defense of his point of view. He fully and well realized that systematic, elaborate discussion of his theories is not possible within the brief compass of a preface. And that was why he was averse to writing a preface. And the first edition of his poems had only a brief advertisement. And it was only at that insistence and advice of his friends that he added the preface to the second edition of the poems. और उसने ऐसा क्यों किया? He did so because he felt that his poems were of a new kind. और new kind कैसे? Both in theme, both in style, and therefore he should not hurl them at the head of the people without a word of introduction. So उसने क्या किया? He added the preface as an introduction. ये देखिए, he therefore added the preface as an introduction, explaining the ways in which his poems differed from the poetry that was popular in the age. And every new and every original poet has to create the taste by which he is read, by which he is desired, by which he is enjoyed, by which he is sought after, and the creation, manifestation, creativity of such a taste was Wordsworth's basic objective in writing that preface. He seeks to bring out drastic revaluation of earlier poetry so that his own poetry can be properly appreciated. The preface contains Wordsworth's views on the nature of poetry and the poetic process, the function of poetry, the qualifications of a poet, and the nature of poetic truth. The poet has a high conception of his own calling and regards poetry as superior to three things. You should know what are these three things where he regards poetry as much superior. The first is philosophy, the second is history, and the third is science. In तीनों से poetry superior है. Now we come to the next point जो आप देख पा रहे हैं, the main theme, attack on poetic diction. Now students here see the theme which dominates the preface and which Wordsworth pursues most consistently is his argument against poetic diction. And as a poet might write, reddening Phoebus instead of rising sun and green attire for grass to increase the elegance of his lines. You can see how the elegance is improved. So Wordsworth here talks about the phraseology, and that is why basically the theory and practice fell into discredit during the early 19th century, partly because of Wordsworth's growing prestige and influence, and Wordsworth's fundamental objection to what he elsewhere calls a vague, glossy, and unfeeling language. Is that to separate poetry from the ordinary speech, is to separate it from the human life. Poetry as communication. The great value of poetry is that it permits the sharing of experiences, the communication of truths. He compares poetry with prose, thus emphasizing its communicative power, and not with painting, which emphasizes its aesthetic qualities. As an example of poetic diction, he chooses a sonnet of the poet Thomas Gray, which expresses very little, but resembles, one might say, a small decorous monument. And the view of poetry as communication is not confined to one period or movement, but it has been, or we can say it has never been so forcefully expressed as in the great passage. So Wordsworth added in 1802, foreshadowed by his earlier sentence. And what is that? Poetry sheds no tears such as angels weep, but natural and human tears. Poetry sheds no tears such as angels weep, but natural and human tears. She can boast of no celestial ichor, that is the fluid that distinguishes her vital juices from that of prose, the same human blood circulating through the veins of them both. So that is called poetry as communication. Now, you can see here, critics poetry as communication. ये देखिए, poetry sheds no tears such as angels weep, but natural and human tears. She can boast of no celestial ichor. And what is that? Fluid that distinguishes her vital juices from those of prose. Human blood circulates through the veins of them both. So this is poetry as communication. William Wordsworth, poetry is the breath and finer spirit of all knowledge. So इसको आप याद कर सकते हैं, बड़ा अच्छा कोट है विलियम वर्ड्सवर्थ का. Now we move on to criticism of Wordsworth's theory. Though Wordsworth's argument against poetic diction is very forceful and cogent, its terms are often inexact. उसका एक phrase है, the real language of men sidetracks important questions, and by using the word language synonymously with diction, he obscures the fact that language involves the organization as well as the choice of words. Moreover, he runs some risk of setting up an opposite but equally false standard for poetry, whereby none but the commonplace words shall be used. जो उसका theoretical preferences है for the language as well as the themes of low and rustic life obviously owes something to the contemporary tendency to idealize whom? To idealize the peasants, the savages, and others who might have escaped the corrupting influence of civilization. Had Wordsworth